Who's familiar with CloudBees as a company and what CloudBees does? Okay, not everybody. I'll just make few introductions, not too much. So what we are doing is Jenkins, primarily Jenkins for enterprise. Company has been founded in 2010, and since fall of 2014, we're doing Jenkins and nothing else. Many maintainers, committers are working for CloudBees. What we do is we have 2 releases per year based on each respective second LTS release. We deliver support. We make user conferences. We deliver professional services, training, and what's quite recent is we helped create certification for Jenkins engineers. So what we have right now, I think starting end of April, is certified Jenkins engineer for Jenkins open source and certified CloudBees Jenkins platform engineer for the CloudBees offering. Feel free to ask any questions about that maybe later on. Okay, so pipeline as code is not only something that Jenkins does, but pretty much everybody that is in the CI/CD space has some thoughts about that. As far as Jenkins is concerned, we need a few features in order to implement pipeline as a code properly. So the first thing is Jenkins Pipeline DSL, which I think until 3 weeks was Workflow DSL and originated from BuildFlow roughly 2 years ago. Then Jenkins File. Jenkins File is a feature that will execute a pipeline that is a pipeline DSL script residing in your source code repository. Multi-branch support helps you to have just one build pipeline definition for all your branches. And I'll come to the details in a second. And repository scanning, which actively is looking for new branches or new organizations, new projects, whatever. So what's new with Jenkins Pipeline? The pipeline jobs can be in your SCM. Right now, that's primarily Git, Mercurial, and Subversion. Others are possible. Some of these are worked upon, but are not yet done. The good thing, if your pipeline job is in your SCM, is you can use your IDE to edit it. And you get syntax highlighting and autocomplete and everything else. Right now, what we do support is IntelliJ and Eclipse. Anybody using NetBeans? No? Okay. Who's using IntelliJ? Okay. Who's using Eclipse? VI? Okay. Did I miss something? Emacs. Okay. So one of the challenges with IDE support was that the pipeline DSL is just a basic implementation, and each plugin is free to enhance the pipeline DSL. So for us to provide IDE support means that you need to go to your master and generate the proper syntax highlighting and autocomplete file. That was some kind of work, but it's available now. So we have syntax coloring support. And the good thing about the pipeline being in your SCM is that your changes are there automatically for your jobs, and they are versioned because they're in your SCM. If you're working with a Jenkins file, it's in your source code repository, and the good thing is not only can you have feature branches for your source for your software, you can also have feature branches for your build pipeline, which is all around software as code and stuff like that. And multi-branch support is implemented in a way that instead of having one job for each branch, you just enter the root URL of your project, and Jenkins will automatically create a new job for each branch, and altogether will be one folder, and underneath that folder there will be these jobs. And if you do a merge, the job will automatically vanish. But that's not enough. What you need on top of that is repository scanning. So feature branches wouldn't be an issue, but if you work with something like Bitbucket Server or GitHub Enterprise, or something similar, we couldn't detect new projects, new teams, or something else automatically. That's what we need the scan job for. Quick picture. So you have your master, 2 feature branches, and you have your pipeline jobs. And this pipeline job is a branch of that master as well as this one. And you can make changes to your build pipeline the same way you do with your application code. Yep.
Is the repository for that a different one than your usual project?
No, it's the same.
It's the same, but you specified what is the Jenkins file.
No,
Jenkins file.
It's called Jenkins File, and it's in the root of your project or your branch, for that matter. So that's what we're doing. If you create a new multi-branch pipeline project, for each branch that contains a Jenkins file, it will automatically create folders and jobs, and you can define whether folders and jobs are automatically deleted or they are retained, because it really depends. Sometimes you need that information. So what were the test results just before merge, for example? Some people need that. And for just experimental branches, you would just delete them. So if you work with organization folders, it's the same all over, just one hierarchy level further up. So this could be the list of your projects, and these are branches inside the project. And it's basically it's all self-maintained. That's the good thing about that. You don't need to do anything for the structure to be up to date continuously. Especially deleting jobs seems to be an issue with most Jenkins installations, because you don't know when you don't need that anymore. And in that case, this helps. That's a quick overview what's available in open source versus what's available in the commercial version. So that did look better yesterday. So this is GitHub Enterprise. This is Bitbucket Cloud and Bitbucket Server. I don't know, well, somehow got mixed up. Pull requests are something that we only support in the commercial version because we have to talk to various APIs to make that happen. But multi-branch jobs for GitHub and GitHub Enterprise on the open source version. And here the implementation is just different between OSS and commercial product, but in reality it doesn't matter that much. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Are there any other servers supported? So
that's what's available right now. I think what's in the works is GitLab support. I'm not sure about anything else. Do you have anything particular in mind?
Well, we are hosting internally.
Yep.
With raw code.
I've no idea.
Okay.
But if you come up later, I can get that information for you. Okay, like I said before, pipeline jobs are generated automatically for each repository that contains a Jenkins file, and underneath that folder for each branch that contains a Jenkins file. So if you do a branch where you don't want Jenkins to build that branch, just make your first commit without a Jenkins file, or change the code in the Jenkins file to detect that branch or that type of branch, and just compile and don't do any tests or something else. But these are patterns that are evolving and emerging. The more customers actually are using those features. So the way we handle pull requests is each time a new branch is created. This is particularly true for GitHub Enterprise and Bitbucket Server. Each pull request that contains a Jenkins file will get a job automatically, and because of the way these pull requests work, we can reflect the build results to the SCM, and if pull requests are merged, we can automatically delete the jobs that were created. Mercurial is on the list for that. Some reading material. So first thing is the reference card on dzone for pipeline DSL. The documentation entry point for pipeline as code. And this is a very good blog article about multi-branch support for pipeline. I would like to switch to my browser now and show you some of that stuff live, if there aren't any further questions right now. Okay?
Sorry.
Yep.
One thing, I think, what was it called? The
organization folders.
Organization folders. What is the concept behind it? I didn't get it.
GitHub Enterprise knows about organizations. like let's say teams, projects, whatever. So usually what you have is a master branch and feature branches. On top of that you have, let's say, projects, and on top of that you can have an organization. So it's more self-maintenance. Are you able to read this? Yeah? Last row? Better? Okay. So one of the examples is our own software, which is hosted on GitHub Enterprise, which is just one part. And if you look at that, that's the only kind of configuration I've done. This is a multi-branch pipeline job with GitHub organization support. That's my credentials. They are managed centrally on the master. That's the owner, the name of that organization. And I want to scan all the repositories. These are not really all the repositories that we have, but these are all that I can see without actually hurting anyone. So, and if you go into, these are all folders. These are auto-generated jobs. So some of these projects will not have Jenkins files, and therefore will not contain anything useful. Single jobs. I've seen customers really having a lot of generated jobs and a lot of folders, but our own structure is much more simple. A different example is Game of Life. Which is not organization folders, but just GitHub. So everybody with just a GitHub account could get something like this. That's a variant of the Game of Life. Also, all these jobs are generated automatically because there's a Jenkins file in that branch.
Could we have a look at a Jenkins file?
Yeah. Sure. It looks like any pipeline DSL thing. That shouldn't be too difficult. Where was my path? Just a sec. No. Okay. Yeah. Let's get something from GitHub, which is not Bees Cloud. Yeah, okay, that's the wrong one. There you go. We need to find something. If you look at this, this is for real. So our knowledge base is done in continuous integration fashion, which is probably quite astonishing, but it works exceptionally well. And there's your Jenkins file. Yeah.
Could you please zoom in a bit?
Like this?
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's nothing spectacular. It's just a lot of definitions. And this is one of the features. You can just load regular Groovy files or pipeline files and then execute them. Yep.
I have a question. What's the normal workflow? If I change something in the Jenkins instance, it's reflected in the code, or have I changed the code to be reflected in the Jenkins instance?
For pipeline DSL?
If I want to change some job, what?
You mean with organizational folders, with generated jobs for multi-branch?
Yeah.
Usually you don't change the jobs because they will be auto-generated next time somebody touches those. So you commit your changes to your source code repository, and then next time the build job is executed.
So mainly I work on the code.
Yeah. That's because it's pipeline as code.
Can you define dependencies between your repositories? So that, for example, you first build or run a job for one, and then depending on the result, you do for another one. Because, for example, in our case, we first build infrastructure as a code for one repository, and on top we would like to test the application. So kind of these relationships in the group.
This Jenkins file from the first repository, so to speak, that will drive your whole build pipeline.
So you have like a parent one and then
usually you don't have pairs. You can do that, but these will be dependent jobs, like you used to have previously. But you can have your primary source code repository and your test stuff elsewhere, and the primary build pipeline definition is in the first source code repository. If you have something like development, QA, and production, or ops, and each should maintain the stuff that they need, what you would do is something like this. Each would have their own build pipeline stuff, and you just would load that part. There are various ways of implementing this. You could use auxiliary templates, which are an enterprise feature. You could just load any Groovy file. There's also the concept of global pipeline library, where you just put some classes and variables aside, and they are automatically inserted into your environment whenever you run one of your Jenkins files. So that really depends on your use case.
Do you test your Jenkins files in some way?
Mm-hmm.
If so, how?
It's source code. You can test it.
But actually, your workflow would test stuff and eventually put in production for a full.
Yeah, I mean, you need.
If you want to test, you will not put in production.
No, you will mock that. It's software. You will mock your Artifactory or Nexus. You will mock your production environment, and then you can test stuff. You could do that in, for instance, if you have something like this. So put that away in a global pipeline library or hidden in a template. You can even do that on that level. So if you have an environment parameter that's, let's say, called test, the underneath methods would know where to deploy to. So that's fairly easy. Yeah, sure. You can test your build pipeline. That's one of the consequences of doing pipeline as code. Makes life more software-like for the build pipelines.
But how does this process actually work? I mean, I do a change, and this change breaks the whole pipeline, for example. So what does actually happen then?
You need to set this up differently. So what you would do is you would have, for example, one master for testing build pipeline changes, and only when the pipeline changes work will you promote that change to the golden repository. It's software.
Okay.
Does this file that you load there has to have any special properties, or is this really just plain Groovy?
If it's not valid Groovy, you will get an exception.
But does it have some special properties, or is it?
No, it needs to be a valid Groovy file, and it needs to work in this environment that you created before loading the Groovy file. What I see with my customers most of the time is not Groovy, but Jenkins DSL, Jenkins Pipeline DSL Groovy, but actually it can be any Groovy stuff that you want. With Jenkins, with pipeline, global pipeline library, there are some restrictions how the file system directories are organized. Basically the same way you would with Java source code. So it would be something like org, Jenkins CI, whatever class name. And as soon as that structure is there, it will work. If not, you will just not find it. So the method will not be available. That's pretty easy. Anything else?
Is there any live system, a very complex pipeline, multiple module builds and stuff like that we could look at? Multiple SCMs version over the whole thing?
Not publicly available right now. There are talks of doing that for Jenkins CI, which is going to be relaunched with new website and new content and everything in the course of this year, but right now there isn't. It's all very customer specific right now, so patterns are emerging, but each solution right now is pretty much different from anybody else's. And most of the customers are very reluctant to actually share this information. It's very hard to get success stories out of customers. It's even harder when you have to add details. Anything else? Yeah?
How can we get linking or the benefit of the validated merge in such a, like from this file? Or is there anything that you can know about this idea?
Validated merge is something that we offer in the commercial Jenkins version. You can get part of the benefits by using the merge branch feature that I mentioned. But if you're really after validated merge, that's in the commercial offering. And it's I think it's only working for Git. It's not working for any other of the SCMs. Not that I'm aware of.
Not for Bitbucket. I'm currently stuck.
It could. It would only work for Bitbucket Git. It would not work for Bitbucket Mercurial. But things can evolve. It's a matter of an API being available that will allow us to do that type of work.
And the plugin, the Git validated merge plugin is made by CloudBees?
Yeah.
Not available, right? It's available, the source?
That's in the commercial version, so that's not open source. A lot of the stuff we do is in open source, like all the Docker stuff, and some of the stuff is just closed source. And if you have complaints, talk to product management. Sometimes these things change. Like for example, the stage view for pipeline used to be proprietary and is now open source. So they're open to suggestions. Sometimes they just, one of the main lines for this type of decisions is if we're working against a commercial product, the probability is higher that it will also be in the commercial product from the Jenkins side. But it's not always the case. So just ask. Anything else?
So with the Jenkins file, there are source code management situations where you are not really able to put a text file directly in your root, in your workspace. Wonderful, wonderful situations. So do you think about a way to point to this file?
No, in these cases you would just use the same build pipeline DSL job as a job definition coming out of a different SCM. Because if you define a pipeline job, that can have an SCM as a source. But for pipeline as code, you need to have a Jenkins file in the root of your source code. I'm sure this can be changed somehow, but this hasn't been a requirement, not really. Is there someone in particular that does this?
Well, we do. Well, if you just agree with other people to have your source code in folders, to define components by folders, then you're basically.
Yeah. You could try Multibranch Tall. So if the folders contain the Jenkins files, then you could use your source code URL as the root of a multi-branch project. Maybe that will work.
And point it into the folder itself.
No. For multi-branch to work, you need to point it one level up, outside of branches. So the same mechanism would work if you have projects instead of branches, because it's fairly agnostic. you could at least give it a try. Yep.
How do you do with a situation that we want to have a different configuration for a job in different contexts? For example, when we merge a pull request, we want to run tests, but when it's a merge to master, we want to also deploy it.
There are several ways to implement this. One of the ways would be to check the name of the branch. That's the easiest thing. And in your Jenkins file, you just check what kind of branch are you. Are you release? Are you master? Are you feature branch? Are you a hotfix? And then act accordingly. That's fairly easy to do that. And we're actually thinking about providing that in a more formal way that would evolve around regex patterns, and then, but also using the branch name for that. But regex patterns would allow you to have separate parts or separate compartments that would be called in different stages. It would just make your life easier. Now you have to code it manually, and then you would be able to configure that by applying some regexes.
It's just another DSL, right?
That's just on the DSL level. Yeah. I think in the multi-branch blog article, I think if you look at that blog article, it's in there. I think it's done in that example. I'm not sure. If not, just ping me and I can provide you an example.
Another question. So, in some large companies, usually you have like a team responsible for quality, so the software development lifecycle.
Yep.
Different teams actually doing the development of the software. And then if you have something like these, basically it's up to the teams doing the software itself potentially to change their workflow and just bypass some steps. So can you kind of blacklist some repositories that they cannot or use a Jenkins file?
Yep. Basically, that's one of the ways you could implement this. These can come from different source code repositories. And if you give each department their own source code repository, they would just have to agree on the build pipeline structure, and the actual implementation would come from the respective source code repositories. That's something you can always do. And there are other ways to implement the same type of functionality that you really have to see where your criteria are. Because if it's an SCM, you can always tell who changed what when. So it's not that bad if somebody changed something, because you can always roll back. So the thing is, if the QA people shouldn't see what the ops people are doing on actual deployment, that might be one reason to do that. But usually it's better if these two talk, because if the QA people test something that's not relevant for deployment, it's just a waste of time. So there are several ways to ensure that this works properly. One of the ways to implement this is using different source code repositories. Another way is to use one and have clear responsibilities. So if somebody changes something where they usually shouldn't change anything, you can do a code review. So in the end, it's software.
Can you please explain parallel method or functionality from the point workspace? Where does it actually, how does it actually run? It run more parallel tasks inside of point.
Okay, so what Pipeline DSL does, it gives you a structure for your build pipeline. Build pipeline are constructed out of stages. Inside a stage, you can have parallel steps. What you do inside the parallel steps is what you previously had as build jobs. And what you usually do if you want to distribute the load and you have a parallel, you want to do parallel builds as much as you can for performance reasons usually, is in each of these parallel steps you allocate a node, and then your stuff gets executed, and then you free the node. The important thing is that if, for example, you're waiting for input, you should free the node, wait for input, and then allocate a new node. Maybe with the same parameters, and you would get the same node most probably, but not guaranteed. Depending on your particular use case, you could also do it the other way around. If you know your build pipeline is pretty fast and you want to speed it up even more, you could allocate the node, define all the stages, and then free the node when the build pipeline is done, and anything in between. This can be dangerous. It's a lot of freedom. But you can have it both ways. And similar with workspaces, you could even allocate 3, 4, or 5 workspaces and play with them. But this is even more dangerous because most of the time you just break things. You have to be very careful if you juggle with several workspaces inside one step. There are some advanced use cases for this, but I have avoided those whenever possible because it's very hard to trace bugs in these scenarios because you have workspaces get clean up automatically. You have leftovers on the same node from different runs. It can get pretty messy. But technically, yes, it's possible. Yeah.
How flexible is the syntax of the pipeline scripts? For example, if I want to use a custom plugin or a very rare plugin that's not yet supported.
Yep. That would look similar to this. So if you have a plugin that is not pipeline aware or doesn't support pipeline, you will have to use a special notation for that. And you don't get any checks on the parameters. So you have to do them right. Because the DSL doesn't know anything about this method. So you have to provide the class name from the plugin, as well as the method name and method parameters. But yeah, it's quite... It's not that rare because some of the plugins are not yet pipeline compatible. We're working on that, and even some of the open source maintainers are now beginning to work on pipeline compatibility, but there are still a lot of plugins that are not pipeline aware.
Okay.
If I go back to my dashboard and go to something I'm more familiar with. There you go. That's the way you do this. It's a step because it's a build step. It's a generic step. And it's a $class for the JUnit result archiver. And this is just one parameter. So that's the method call from a plugin that has no idea that pipeline exists. And what we're working on is removing those occurrences and also trying to get away from some of the shell script things. Like Maven support is something that is worked upon. Yeah. So here you can see we have a stage with parallel steps. One of the parallel steps is quality analysis. Next parallel step is performance test. And whatever you see in here is basically what you do in your old style build job definition, if it's a freestyle job. For stages you can define a concurrency. Usually there's no limit, but if you look at build times, they will be in, let's say, 1-figure minute range, probably better. And if you do integration tests, they will take much longer. So it might not be useful to always, on each commit, execute all the integration tests. So what you define is the concurrency for this stage. And if you set the concurrency to 1, the effect will be that if you have 5 of those builds in the time where this stage is executed, the next test run will use the accumulated changes from all the 5 builds.
Is there some sort of UI in Jenkins where you can see the chain jobs? Your pipeline, for instance, not just the simple jobs? Because there are some open source plugins which visualize your chains, jobs, and
you could use them for this as well. Yeah. But the thing is, this is just one job. So one row is one build. These are 4 stages. And because this is just a build job, you could here trigger a second build job. And either usually wherever you use build pipeline plugin or whatever, which evaluates the dependencies of the build jobs, should work even with this. And you could use build pipeline to visualize that, but the thing is you wouldn't see the stages. There's some work going on to make this more customizable. So you would be able to do team dashboards or personal dashboards where you see the 5 build pipeline instances that are of significance for you, but that's not right now available.
Okay. And here the different stages, you're able to pick, I pick one stage, race, for instance. Then you're able to pick up from the point where you don't have to start over from the beginning, right?
That depends.
Okay.
So this is a marker for checkpoints. Checkpoints is part of the commercial offering. So yes, the thing is, let's say you're in here and for whatever reason you lose connection to the master, or the master is restarted because of updates. This job will be picked up at the last known good partial step and continued. Checkpoints are for cases where in that stage something fails and you want to have a defined point where you can resume and continue. Sometimes these are DNS errors or whatever, networking issues most of the time, or you're working with Tomcat and your class loader gets out of memory, whatever. That's stage view, open source like 10 days ago. Average time in that stage for the past 5 builds. As default, it's configurable. You can get less or more, whatever you want, but out of the box, these are past 5 builds. And you can even see the logs and what failed. If the Git step fails, usually that means that the internet connection is not working properly. Maybe it's too slow or not there at all. Yeah. So I think this will evolve further. Right now, what stage view doesn't do is visualize parallel steps inside of one stage. Which is hard to do for edge cases, which is easy to do for the simple cases.
If I have two in parallel and one breaks, do I have to rebuild both? Or
no, the stage will break.
Yeah, or one.
And depending on what you do in your script code, you could omit one of the parallel steps. But in a simple case, you just repeat both parallel steps. Yeah.
So if we say that the QA step has a dependency to the source code, let's say a test case or something like that, and I would check in and change in the test case itself. Is there a solution that it picks up all the binaries from the previous steps and just does the QA in the stage?
There are 2 answers to that. If you change the tests, you could trigger the build from that stage, and it could just notice that the source code hasn't changed and use the artifacts from the build before. That's something you could do. Or what you also could do is actually cutting this in half and have separate build jobs. If that's the case, that happens quite often. If you work in a test-driven environment, those are the same changes as the source code from your application. So, as so often, that depends on your use case. Anything else? Okay, thanks.